I'm Chris. I'm going to be doing a quick webinar for Accelerator tips and tricks. So kind of during this webinar, well, actually, I guess as a quick introduction, I'm a consultant with Systems Accountants. We're originally UK-based and now available in the US and Europe. We're kind of focused on staffing, recruiting, and obviously consulting, and with a particular focus on the UNIT4 ecosystem. In terms of myself, obviously, as you'll probably pick up, I'm from the UK originally. I've worked with UNIT4 for 7 years now, and kind of initially in a lot of reporting roles, but have now worked across a lot of the modules. I've been in the US and based out of Chicago for the last 3 years. In terms of the webinar itself, obviously it's going to be based around Excelerator. It is going to move quite fast because obviously we've got a lot of different kind of levels of people on the webinar. So it's going to be quite quick moving. We're going to actually start from scratch. So we're going to build an Accelerator template just basically from just browsers. And we'll create that and then go through kind of different steps. I'll be tagging certain things as kind of little tips and tricks, but obviously as I'm going along, there may be certain things that I do that you wouldn't necessarily have realized that you could do within Accelerator. There is I guess for kind of everyone's benefit, there is a Q&A section. You should see it at the bottom of your screens in the Zoom. The plan is later on to take some of the questions. I've seen that a few have come in already. Obviously, we'll kind of work out how many there are and whether they're all doable within the thing, within the time. But without further ado, I am going to jump into the system. For everyone's reference, I'll be using Report Engine 9.4, and it's based on well, actually the environment is a Milestone 5 environment. That shouldn't make a huge difference in terms of what you see. And as promised, we are actually going to start from Report Engine just completely from scratch. So our first step is that we're going to open a blank Report Engine file and just create an Accelerator based on browsers that we already have set up. The first step is just going to be adding in a RE-SQL. So what this is the section of the package which will bring in the data. Obviously separately, there's another part of the package which will kind of present it within Excel. I guess one of the things that I want to debunk for some who haven't used Accelerator as much is the idea that kind of the RE-SQL method is difficult. So it's very simple in terms of what we're going to do here, and then present it into Excel. I know some of the older versions of Accelerator were kind of just based in Excel, and so this can initially look a little bit daunting, but effectively we're planning on showing that it isn't. Okay, so first thing that we're going to do, so this is the section which brings in our data. I usually like to give it a name, so we'll call this schooner. And the first key thing that we need to do is just bring in some data. So to do that, we're going to have a .query section. So the keywords that we'll have are clearly .query. This will be our main query, and at the end we'll need a .end query. We're going to, so the large majority of accelerators, kind of no matter what level, are based on browsers. So that's kind of what we're going to focus on. You may have seen sort of SQL ones before. Obviously, we advocate not using them where possible, because obviously the browser kind of, for example, takes into account data control and the other benefits that you'd have from running it from the system. So to bring in a browser, there is just a keyword which is agr_getBrowser. And you'll see there are quite a lot when you start typing, you bring up quite a lot of tooltips. to be honest, the browser is definitely the most useful of them. That's very rarely use any of the others. So based on the system that I have, I've got a specific browser I'm going to initially start with, and bring that into here just so that we can present the same data but in an Excel format. So my initial browser is profit and loss 1, which may give you a hint that at some point it's going to become profit and loss 2. The next step is just refreshing the data to bring that new data in. It will pop out into a fresh data tab. Without kind of jumping through that too much, I'm actually going to close it because obviously this does show the actual data we've brought back. But what we're really interested in is kind of obviously presenting it into an Excel format. So we're just going to close that and demonstrate that at this point you could already start playing around in Excel itself. So at the top, we just hit Design New Accelerator Report. And the useful thing that it's going to do when that runs is it will pop out into Excel and the tab. Bear with me. There's one I made earlier. And the tab. Let's just let it open. Okay, so it will pop out in this format and it will show you the columns that are already available within that browser. So immediately, if we wanted to load it, whatever, and I'm sure kind of a lot of you are doing this already, but we'll just load current sheet and it will show that same data. You can see some transactions that I've put into my dummy system just for the purpose of this. At this point, we could kind of get into some of the Excel side tips and tricks. But actually before that, what we're going to do is we're going to make this into kind of a report pack. So we're just going to bring in a second browser. So we're going to make this our query P&L, and separately as part of our report pack, we'll just have the query tribal. Which again is just going to be based on a browser that I've got within my system. So at this point, I'm now going to refresh data again. It will give me a quick error. I've overwritten it. Okay. It's gone. Okay, bear with me 1 minute. And let's balance 1, 2. Okay, apologies for this. 1, 2. Because I've left a big space at the start. Okay, just to prove that it can go wrong in a webinar. Okay, so if you manage to type your browser name in correctly without putting a space at the start, then it will come back seamlessly. So this will bring back our P&L and trial balance data. And in turn, what I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to delete the previous template that's already created. This top section here just shows your different files within your report package. So the new .SQL is this section here, the query section, and then separately your Excel file, as in the output, is also shown here. As we've shown kind of how easy it was to create that, I'm going to delete it anyway. And then recreate a new one, and this time it's going to have 2 tabs. So here we have effectively kind of the beginnings of a report pack. Both of these, again, we can load the sheets to see what they look like. Or we could do load all sheets, but we'll kind of keep them separate for now. Obviously, later on, if you put this onto the menu, you would then have the option to kind of run this and get them all listed out as a report pack, but directly from UNIT4, or even kind of email them out depending on your specific requirements. Okay. Okay, so as promised, we're now going to play around with the Excel file that is created and do a few tweaks within here. So the one thing that I guess I kind of wanted to demo by just doing that quick example there is that actually it's quite useful in that it gives you everything that's available in the browser very quickly, and gives you, I guess, a layout of keywords already there. So in terms of kind of the next steps and amending this, obviously it's quite simple to do some bits. So for example, I've decided that I don't actually want to see the profit centers within there. So I just decided to delete those columns, and it will still load correctly. Now, as mentioned, I'm kind of not going to go through all of the different keywords, but I will outline, I guess, a few now. So it initially starts with a subtotal outline, and what that does is kind of gives you a grouping. But at this stage, it's not kind of doing it by anything. So what we actually want is we want these ACC level ones to be in our kind of to give us subtotal levels. So if I load the output again, then obviously you'll see it's kind of got your revenue and your expense, but it's got no totals for those, and that's obviously something that's useful to have. So we'll unload that. And now within our subtotal outline, what we're going to do is we're going to choose to add in a subtotal outline on the ACC level 1. So we'll just put in R0 account. And we can read all the names from this section here, which again is just another kind of another advocate for almost building them from scratch and then getting this format which tells you what the different fields that are already available are. Because it makes it very easy rather than having to check back and forth. So we have our subtotal outline and the footer, which also goes with this subtotal. We also define R0 account. So when we're doing this, we can load again the current sheet just to check that it's doing what we expect. And now it is, in that we've got totals by revenue, by expense. The next thing that kind of I guess would be useful is seeing some detail on that bottom line, because at the moment it's the total by revenue or expense, but it doesn't actually label that. So we can do all our labels within here. If you've used this before, then apologies for kind of going over old stuff, but obviously if you haven't, then these parameters are quite useful within this section. So within here, what we can do is put it within angular brackets and put this XR0 account, which is the description, which is saying revenue or expenses. So if I put XR0 account within there, now it's going to give us it's going to say either revenue or expense. And separately, just to kind of tag this a total, I'm going to add in a total as well. And just in the interest of making it look nice, I'm going to right justify it and make it bold. Okay, let's move that out of the way. So now when we load the current sheet, will give us a revenue and expense as we want to see it. Okay, Now, one other thing that that you may kind of immediately pick up about the profit and loss that we're producing here, a useful thing to have on that is an actual profit or loss figure. So beyond the revenue and expense, we kind of want this bottom cell to give us a profit and loss, or profit or loss, I should say. So within this, we kind of have lots of different ways that we can do it. For example, obviously it's Excel, so we have the full functionality of Excel. We can do sums here. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to use a second subtotal and do it that way, and bring it into there. So what we'll do is we'll have subtotal outline, and then as a way of effectively passing in something that's going to be a subtotal for everything that's in our report, going to use client, i.e. aggressor company, because that's, you're only going to have one client within a browser report. So it'll be, although it's a subtotal, it's going to give us a total. Okay. One other thing that I'm actually going to do at this stage, and I'll explain very briefly, but this footer that we currently have in here, I'm actually going to delete and recreate it in the same way. With some of the versions of Report Engine, there's some slight oddities around what it treats as a formula, and what it just displays, and when it just displays the formula. And my kind of quick fix for that is just to delete and recreate the line, so that it's kind of more standard Excel formats. But it is otherwise going to look exactly the same. So we're going to have, as before, footer R0 account. And then over here, we're going to have our total and XR0 account. And I'll rewrite justify it. And then, as promised, to bring in a total below that, we're going to have our second footer, which will be client. So here, what we're doing effectively is bringing in the other total that it's doing. So this will be profit/loss. And then I'm just going to quickly format the cells. For now, I'll just make them different colors so that it's clear kind of which is which. So if we load this, we now have kind of total revenue, total expense, and what you'll notice is that it's grouping it up, and I will show that in 1 second. So if you expanded everything, you would then kind of have that key information underneath. Now, a couple of other changes that obviously we might want to make to our report. We've already got total revenue, total expense here, so we don't really need to see them on the left. So I'm going to delete those columns. And then separately, as mentioned, it's currently kind of displaying in view 2. And there's a little trick to the outline function, which lets us alter this. So yeah, as mentioned, we'll delete these two, as that data is already there. And then the outline is currently just subtotal comma outline, which indicates that it's doing the grouping. But here we can put in a number and decide the level of grouping that we want it to do. So for example, if I put in a 3 here, what you will get when you load the current sheet is it will by default open into level 3, whereas if I put 1, it would kind of open into just the grouped profit and loss level. One other thing that I'm going to do, so by default, the query that it brings back, it will display it will display the detail level row. So here, what it's doing is it's kind of showing one for every single line that I've got in the report. Obviously, if you're tweaking it as I have, and you're removing the profit center, then it's not necessarily going to be useful to see this data not aggregated. So here we've got two of the same account, but actually we're seeing two separate lines for it. So I'm going to unload that and change this detail to be group, which is probably the most useful of these functions. And I'm going to choose to group it on the account. So all that's doing is it's going to aggregate the data that we have within this. So you'll see we now get something which looks a little bit more as we'd hope. And let me find my place in my notes. Okay. Cool. So far, I guess those of you who've used this before will have noticed that when we ran these reports, we actually let's save that for now. So yeah, when we ran these reports, you'll notice we kind of just passed in the browser name, and it gave us results. Obviously, the reality is that the majority of our browsers in a live system have parameters that we want to be able to change, and you don't want to be in a position where you're having to obviously go into the system and change the parameters there. You want to do it all from the accelerator sheet. And I guess there's kind of different ways of identifying these parameters. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by flipping these into a flipping this into a profit and loss 2, which is my version of the same report. But this one, it's actually going to have period parameters on the browser. I'm not actually going to kind of jump into the system and show it all there, but how it works is that where you've tagged the prompt, that's then going to be queried here. And the parameters themselves, there are lots of different ways of identifying kind of what you'd need to put here. The one I actually like the most is just running it from here and letting it error, because it will then tell us what is missing. So, like, alternately, you could go into the system and use Control-Shift-H on the field, find out the name, etc., and work out whether it needed a specific suffix for greater than or whatever. If I just simply refresh this data, it will now give us an expected error, and it will say, right, period greater than is required, and it will give us exactly how it needs to show, so that we'll bring data back. So this here is the kind of significant part. Obviously, for period is quite simple because period is called period within the system. But for some where you're, for example, doing it on balance tables, it can be a bit more tricky where it kind of where it's got a certain thing labeled as dim1, or if it's a relation on it, then it'll be R0 or R1, R2, etc. So they can become slightly more complicated. And yeah, this is quite a neat and easy way of doing it. So to add our parameters in, our period is going to be greater than or equal to. Now you still need an equal sign, which is kind of like, yeah, I've always found slightly odd in some ways. But we then put in the value that we want to pass in. So in this case, I want it to be greater than or equal to, actually, it's profit and loss, so I'll do it for 2020-01. There is actually a second parameter on this, which is a period less than or equal to. Obviously, based on how it is already, we could very easily work out what it's going to be. If greater than or equal to is GE, we probably guess that it's going to be LE. But we do it anyway for the sake of showing it again. Okay. So now when we run that, it's going to have effectively parameterized our data and should give us same results as we had before, as these were hard-coded into the original profit and loss browser. And I could run this again, but before doing that, I'm going to make the same change to my trial balance. So this is useful in that we can amend the values here. For example, I could run it for 2019 and demonstrate that I have no dummy data in 2019. So if I were to run that, you'd then start seeing the P&L return 0. So it is kind of doing a different return. But obviously, what we don't want to be doing is separately putting this into to different sections. So we're going to look at the parameters. So parameters are also defined within the section, and obviously we kind of jumped over them at the start. But the top part of this report is where we'd define them. So the key word for defining a parameter is declare. The two that we'll want to pass in these situations are going to be the existing period and the period 0. To do that, we're just going to declare initially our period. And here you have to identify the type of field this parameter is. For the majority of things, string will work. If you've kind of not used this before, then generally you can use string. We are later going to change these just to do something else slightly different in a minute. So we will change it, but for now we'll just define this as a string, and we can then put a default value in here as well. So in this case, I'm going to put 2020-02 for the current period, 03 actually. And separately do the same, but for our period 0 parameter, if I can spell declare. This will be 2020-00, and I definitely didn't press space that time. Okay, so that defines the parameters themselves. To pass in a parameter, you just use the key, which is a $ and then a question mark, and then the parameter name. So for this one, we want it to be greater than or equal to period 0. Okay. And our less than or equal to is equally going to be our current period, which will just be period. And as before, we want the same for our profit and loss as we do for our trial balance. So now we're kind of building a report pack based on these parameters. Later on, obviously at this point, we're just kind of entering the defaults up here. Later on, if we chose to put this report onto the menu, these could be passed through from the system. So you could say, right, I'm going to run this report for 2020-03. And I want to see that specific data when you run this report. So it gives the option of kind of putting parameters in from the system itself. Now, one other thing that obviously you might want to do, the period 0 is always going to be based on what the current period is. So actually what we really want is we don't really want to be entering this period 0. We want it to work out from the fact that we're putting in 2020-03. We want it to work out that the period 0 should be 2020-00. So here what we can do is we can effectively have one parameter be based on another. So there are a few different ways of doing this. The one that I think I probably like the most is having these defined as int type, which just means integer, as it then lets us do a few different formats on it. So here we've declared our period and our period 0. We're going to delete the default period 0 because we want it to work this out. One other thing that we're going to do as part of this to get it to work is we're actually going to declare a year also as an integer, just to sort of make it really clear if anyone is going into the report what the exact process is. And this one's a little bit of a trick. So to do one parameter based on another, we'll have a dot set. The dot set will basically update a specific parameter based on what we type in here. So what we're planning on doing initially is we want to dot set the year. So we want it to work out what the year should be, which in turn we're then going to use to work out period 0, just to kind of spell it out for anyone who's looking at the report later. And the slight trick is that because these are integers, if I divide 2020-03 by 100, it's actually going to give me 2020. So to do that, I'm going to use the parameter again. And we're going to divide it by 100 to get our 2020. And then to get our period 0, I'm going to times, sorry, not semi-year. To get my period 0, I'm actually going to times that year by 100. So I'm dividing by 100, and timesing by 100, but actually getting a different number. But it does, it does exactly what we want. So. And quickly on the data tab, obviously we kind of skipped over it earlier, but it can be useful just for quickly checking that it's doing what we want. So if I refresh data, we get this data tab. It shows the different parts of the query we've got. The section that we're interested in here is just the parameters. So if I jump in there, we'll see that it's got the period, which we've entered as 2020-03. The year it's now calculating is 2020, and the period 0 is 2020-00. Okay, and in turn, our kind of Excel report hasn't changed. It's the exact same data. We've just got a slightly simpler way of selecting it. Okay. Okay, so the other thing that we can use these parameters for is we can pass these into the Excel to display data in a different way. So, for example, within this, not there. Let's close that. Within this schooner report, which I should have left open actually. Within the schooner report, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to decide that what I want to see is not just an overall profit and loss between two periods. I want to see it as a monthly profit and loss. So to do that, we can define our parameters and pass them in, and then separately use a crosstab, which is exactly what we're going to do. So within here, all I'm going to do is declare a period 1 to 12, have them all calculate based on the period that we enter at the start, and then pass those periods 1 to 12 through into the report. Now, in the interest of saving typing on a webinar, I have saved in Notepad what I'm going to enter. So here we've just got our declare periods 1 to 12, each with a type of int. And in the section down here, I'm going to use, again, these little dot set calculations just to calculate what the periods 1 to 12 are. Okay. So now when we do that, it's going to create a parameter for each of these. Okay. So again, what we're going to do is launch this schooner if it's not already open, which I think it is. So within here, we will reload the data. But before we do that, what we're actually going to want to do here is we're going to want to show the amounts across the page here. To do that, we're going to use a commonly used keyword within the Excel function of Excelerator. It's just crosstab, and the thing that we're cross-tabbing on is the period. So now we can put in a specific period here, and it will show us for that period. Or in this case, if we want to see it for all the different periods, then what we can do is we can copy them across the page, which is what I'm going to do, and see if I get close to 12 there. Oops. And in here we'd have period 1, period 2, etc. Again, just in the interest of not putting that in, I'm just going to copy it from here. And then delete these extra columns. Okay. To resize them slightly, and interests, we'll put January in here and copy that across. It's hidden by the zoom bar. Okay, January to December. And then obviously we've kind of got period showing in here. Initially, we'll just run it to check that we get some results, which we do. But now that it's set like this, we obviously kind of don't need that split. So I'm going to unload that and then let it aggregate. Before I do that, I will move these columns. So now when I load the current sheet, it's giving us what we want to see. So here we've got, kind of January, January through to December. Obviously, I've only queried 3 months, and actually in the test system that I'm running it from, I only have 2. I'm not kind of obviously going to go into the different sections of the formatting. That's kind of just Excel formatting, etc. But there are a couple of other little tricks that I just want to show. So here, for example, we might decide that that we actually want to see a what do you call it, first quarter profit and loss. So to do that, I'm going to do it in a slightly different way. We could choose to again pass the parameters and have a range of them here, but sometimes just in terms of what the output shows, people quite like to see the sums within here. So for the sake of that, I'm going to do it. So in here, I'm just going to type equals sum these 3. And I'm going to call this first quarter. And immediately, if I do that, what you will notice is that it does do the sums as we want, and adds up the amounts for each of these. But obviously what it's not done is the totals, because the footer isn't necessarily going to kind of treat them as summable columns, as it's not even being pulled by Excelerator. So the kind of quick tip for that, there's lots of different ways, but the easy one is to actually just use a $sum in the fields that you want to sum up. Obviously, you could do things like kind of try and sum above or use subtotals. It can just get slightly messy because, for example, you obviously can't sum everything above this field, as you'll bring in one sum and then have double the value. But the dollar sum works quite nicely. and I'm going to enter it into all of the fields where I want to see a sum. Okay. So now when we load current sheet, it's now just doing those ones where we've entered the sum. Obviously, I've kind of just done the first quarter ones, but it's doing exactly what we want and giving us our sums in there without having to sort of worry about it too much. Okay, section, group. Jump. Okay. So obviously at the moment we're just doing our crosstabs based on periods. I'm slightly conscious of the time, the fact that we want to take questions. But we could, if we choose, we could do this based on the other parameters. So for example, you probably saw earlier I had the profit centers in there. We could choose to have one for each profit center. Without kind of getting into it too much, as it can require a bit of work itself. One common question that we get is whether you can have dynamic cross-tabbing. So by that I mean that, for example, if you run for a list of profit centers, you'd want to see profit center 1, profit center 2, profit center 3. But if profit center 2 isn't in your query, you don't want to see that showing. There is a method for doing this. Yeah, as I say, I can't display it all now, as it's probably a 20-minute session in itself. But if anybody is kind of interested, then yeah, send me a message. Or if you just want a tip, then effectively you kind of do a select, and within your select you need to include a row number so that it can select parameter 1 equals, and then you loop. And when you loop, it can pass that in as a parameter. So you get exactly that, where your parameter 1 then equals profit center. So that's a very quick explanation of something that's quite complicated. But yeah, as I say, if anyone does want more information, then just send me a message. And one other quick tip that I kind of almost wrote in as my first question before I move on to the Q&As that have come in, was around that we get quite often, which is having a macro-based Excel accelerator. And the reason why I think this comes up is that it sort of has to be done in 2 different places. And one of them is actually slightly awkward in that this, by default, is kind of going to create a Excel SX file. I've not actually come up with a kind of way of amending it here. So my workaround is saving the Excel file off as an XLSM, as in a macro-enabled Excel, saving it there and then dragging it back into here and dropping it in here, and then deleting the existing one. And the other step, which is very easy to miss, is that just down here in the behavior section, there's an output type. And if you want it to have macros when you run it from the system, you have to select it there as well. Otherwise, it will just appear as an XLSX, regardless of what the file type there is. So yeah, that's one other kind of, I guess, quick one that comes up quite a lot. I'm going to have a quick look at the Q&A and see if any of them I can answer. Bear with me. You'll see a blank screen for a little bit. Okay, so the first question is, what is the purpose of the dot name? Actually, that's not the first question. I'll come back to the other one in a second. The purpose of the dot name, so actually I quite like naming all of them anyway, but it does then, so you notice when I ran the Excel, popped out as .schooner without me doing anything. So it does name the Excel file. In the interests of, I guess I kind of didn't talk to it at the start, but in the interests of kind of creating these, I always use a little character thing that's fewer than 8 characters, I think it is, so that then when you put it on the menu, you don't get an issue and have to kind of change the names. And I would actually generally change this just to be schooner as well, just because I quite like having it all consistent. Okay. We've got one which is going over loops, groups, and parent-child. That is quite a long. That is quite a long session. I will. Yeah. So I'll probably send you an email about that one. It's kind of not something that we can do in just a couple of minutes, if you see what I mean. I've got one here, which is where can I find the keywords and descriptions for defining the Excel spreadsheet. So I know that that one of the areas that people don't always realize that they have available is within the help files. You do get some information. The help file is actually a little bit long. So if you press help and then press yes, what it should do is launch a little thing. And within here, it does give certain information. I've always found it a bit lengthy and a bit awkward to find kind of those specific things. And I can't remember if all the keywords are actually listed in here. But the one place that I do sometimes use it for is, for example, I was in a Control F. If I do that and then I wanted to see how to do like a greater than, and hadn't done the method that we used earlier. What it does is, earlier when we did the periods is greater than or equal to, I kind of find some of that stuff in here. So I sometimes use it to just search through if I already know sort of what I'm looking for. But yeah, it's a big file. Makes it a little bit unwieldy. Okay. If you have multiple attributes, a group column name in Excel, how will it behave? Okay, so this one, I need to think about what the questions are asking. If you do a group column name and you have multiple, so it will group on, so actually I think we've probably seen that in that we had an example where we had the period showing and then remove them. So I guess just for reference, the question was, if you have multiple attributes and you do a group column name in the Excel, how will it behave? It will group on the thing that you're showing, but obviously it will kind of squeeze them up separately if you kind of remove columns. I guess in terms of that, I've probably not played around with it too much because I'd like to define it all to remove the chance that it'll do something slightly odd. So for example, I know that you can get some slightly oddities if you try subtotaling and the data isn't sorted. So yeah, again, like it's another where you can ask what will it do, and I'd probably answer that you you should define it correctly, and then it will work. Is it possible to show pop-up instead of hard coding the date? Instead of hard coding the date. Oh, I see what you're saying. So okay, so this question is about when I put the parameters in, or sorry, when I run the report and it's got a prompt on the date or period. Whether it could kind of give a pop-up box and ask what that date is. And I assume you're asking that because that's what the old version used to do, as in the one in Excel. I don't think that's possible. I would have to investigate that with the new one, but I don't think it's possible. I think it does need to be defined and it will just error if it's not. So yeah, I don't think that one's doable. The reality is the majority of these accelerator reports are actually going to be run from the menu, so you'll kind of be putting them in there. But yeah, that's an interesting question that I don't think you can do. Okay, this question here about Report Engine itself. So yes, Report Engine is something that would kind of initially have to be installed by IT. On the older ones, it's kind of, yeah, as I sort of mentioned at the start, some of the old versions, I guess before it was Report Engine, were just an add-in to Excel, and that does still work. but the report engine is a lot easier and nicer to use, as we've kind of shown with some of that stuff that we've done there. I think if you've got a UNIT4 application, I think you can just ask either support to send you the latest report engine, or maybe it's just available on the portal actually. But either way, the local IT department could install it on a specific system, and also separately kind of on the server where UNIT4 is held. Okay. So this question is, basically they're saying they've had no experience in the report engine or writing reports at all. How do you start getting more familiar with the report engine? Well, I guess I guess the last question almost covers some of that. The first step is literally just to get it installed so you can run it. If you already have report engine there, then I guess kind of the first step that I did was almost just showing that it's very simple to create your initial report based on a browser, which you've probably already got. So if you, I guess that is the first step really, is you'd open your report studio, much like I did at the start of this session, and then kind of go from there and query an initial browser. One thing that I did mean to say at the start, which I don't think I did, is that this session has been recorded, so there will be one available. So I know that I went through kind of quite a lot of certain things very fast. So if you did later just kind of want to watch it back, but it's slower, then obviously you can do that. Okay, using the control sheets would be easier to manage periods. Can you comment? So this kind of questions about the control sheet that's available within the system. I guess for people who, I guess just to show that, accidentally clicked the Zoom box there. Okay. So what this is saying is it's kind of a different place where you can have the parameters and so on. Do that, you can go add control sheet, and it displays a lot of stuff. They're kind of talking about like some of this, which is similar to what we've done. I think there probably are specific reasons why you wouldn't necessarily want to do it in here. For me personally, I just prefer having all my data, including my parameterized periods, defined in one section, and then separately the Excel is the output. I think the times that I do use the control sheet still, I actually do for the templates. So when if I, for example, want to do this same report and I wanted to have one profit and loss and trial balance for each profit center, then you can define some of that within here. Obviously I kind of, we've not got that long, so I can't really demonstrate that now. But you would use kind of a group in here, and then define the sheets. So that's actually really the only area that I currently use the control sheet for, is the sheets that it will actually run. But you are right that you could define the periods there as well. Okay. Next question. Can you show us how to bring a relation into the Excelerator report? Okay, so this comes up sometimes if you've been using, I guess, the older versions of Excelerator, where you could literally go query, so say query balance, and then relation, and do that. With the new one, I kind of, I guess, quickly passed over at the start, but I mentioned that almost all of our reports should be built based on browsers. And of course, you can do effectively the same thing because, for example, that query balance, you can just have a simple browser based on the balance table. But the difference is that instead of defining the relation to bring in within here, you would define it in your browser. So, for example, that account relation that we saw, I would have added that account relation in as a relation on top of the accounts. into the system and then into the browser that I'm querying on. And then when it comes through, I've already got the relation there. So that's kind of how we'd recommend doing it. If you were trying to, I guess, bring it in separately, it can become a bit messy because you're going to have multiple different queries that you're then trying to almost piece together within the report engine view. Okay, the next question is, does the RE-SQL report run faster than a browser? That's one that I'm not sure on. I think it will probably run probably the same. I'm not sure if it will render quicker. It might render slightly quicker. One advantage that you do get from this is that it can query the data once. So, for example, if you I guess if you had multiple different tabs of an Excel report, which were based on the same underlying data, your RE-SQL section could just query that data once. And then you could present it in all your different ways in the different tabs. So it does speed it up in terms of that. So that is one kind of, possible benefit you can get. But in terms of whether it runs faster than the browser, I don't think so. I guess the only thing that can sometimes take a time is when it's actually sort of loading the information onto the browser page. So I know there are sometimes some time delays on that. But yeah, I'm not 100%, but I don't think it would run. Yeah, it would run faster or slower, particularly. Okay. How do you build parameters such that it can be entered when the report is run versus being calculated or driven by the system? Okay, so I think this one is saying, basically kind of when someone's actually running the report, they're saying you wouldn't necessarily be doing it from here. You would want it, you would want to actually kind of enter that information. I think that's what it's saying. So this one here, so obviously we've entered this as a default, so effectively we can change this here and it would change all our data. And as I mentioned, I've actually not put any 2019 data in, so it will kind of return zeros. So we can do it there. Obviously this is kind of the building section of it, so where you can build your accelerators, get them looking how you want. The separate section that you might want to do would be to create a user-defined menu and move this into your customized reports, so that so you'd have a user-defined menu, a user-defined report, and then when you run it from the system, you could define in your user-defined report the specific parameters that you're passing through. So that's usually kind of how these would later be run. I've kind of obviously not shown that here just because, well, it does take kind of a couple of minutes to set up the menu, to set up the report, set up menu access, and then run it. But yeah, those are kind of the steps to doing that and what you'd actually probably do if you were running these reports. So some of these are duplicates. So function like current date for your period. Okay, so this is kind of a similar question. Actually, we just slightly over. Okay, I'll take this as the last one and then wrap up. But the question is there a function like current date for your period? So this I kind of haven't done anything within the report engine file for. The reason for that is that I'd usually pass this through from the system again. And within the system, you do then have parameters which can, for example, look up your current accounting period. So I've always preferred doing that because, for example, within here, it wouldn't necessarily know that whether or not you've rolled over into the next month. Whereas UNIT4 will know that, and it will have a current period or current period -1, depending on how you want to run it. So personally, I would always do it in the user-defined report and set your macro there. So you just use the little, the dollar, and then the specific thing you're looking for. So it could be CURR_period, or OB underscore period if you want the opening balance period. So those macros are available there, and I think you can find them. I think you can see kind of all the different options there within the help files. So I'd usually do that and then pass that into here, as opposed to kind of defining it within this section. Okay, so I'm kind of aware that there's quite a lot of questions that I didn't get through. Where possible, I will try and have a look, and actually it might be easier. Yeah, if anyone does have kind of additional questions, I think my email is on the thing. So yeah, feel free to send me an email. I guess aside from that, I just want to say thanks for joining. I hope you found it useful. And yeah, stay safe. Okay, thanks everyone.